I want to thank our sponsor, Planet Ford. Planet Ford has always been a proud supporter of law enforcement in the community, providing customer service and fleet management, sales, and service. If you're looking for that personal quality service, contact Planet Ford in Spring or online at planetford.com. You're listening to Crime Scene Today, where we discuss current, future issues in law enforcement, forensics, crime scene investigation. I'm your host, Dan Zientek. Join me today, co-host and longtime friend, actually my homicide partner for many years, John Schmitt. Thank you for coming in today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So we're going to be talking about a case that we had worked many years ago, back in 2007.
Yeah.
So this particular case led to a little bit of controversy, sort of an unusual case because of when it happened and the time that it happened. So to give you a little bit of background in the area and things of where this occurred, so we're going to be talking about the murder of Rodney Earl Shamlin. And in this particular case, it happened in Montgomery County, Texas, which is about a population of 600,000 for listeners that are not from this area. And this part of the county is right where a major freeway, it's now 69, used to be 59. I think it actually was 59 back then. But currently, if you were to pull up Porter, Texas, there's a lot of new shops and freeways and things that are over there. That's not what it looked like back then. It was predominantly, I would say, more lower to mid-income. You had a lot of trailer parks, mobile home areas, and the lots that did have homes on them were at least an acre or so. So it was more of what people would consider a country type of part of the county and a rural part. And so that's sort of the generic area that we're in. And on this particular day, it's in the afternoon, and we get a call that comes into 911 from a property owner, a homeowner, that says that he has found someone stealing on his property, and he has shot him, and he needs people to come out there. So that's how we get the call, and police respond to the scene. And at this time, to give you an idea of different things that are happening, sort of the legal side of things, and many people at this point have heard of the castle law doctrine, and that's been on the books for a long time. However, in Texas, in 2007, start of September 1st, they had made a change to the castle law doctrine, and basically the big change to it was that you no longer had to retreat. And they basically defined that, saying that to protect your property, protect your home, your car, that you did not have to retreat. You could stand your ground to protect your stuff. This happened a couple of months after that. So that was big news as far as the law change. And then the next thing to come up, November 14th in Pasadena, Texas, you had a neighbor who shot some people breaking into the house or nearby, and to read you a little bit of the transcript from 911 that became a big controversy on this case. And the reason that I'm speaking about this case, and it was actually the case in question that we're talking about is Joe Horn. The reason that it became big for our case is that this was big in the news. They had been covering this for a couple of weeks right before the shooting that we're going to work happens. And the 911 transcript that everybody is hearing from this other one is the homeowner saying that he's got a shotgun. Do you want me to stop him? Dispatch like, nope, don't do that. There's not any property worth someone getting shot over. Caller tells him, well, hurry up, catch these guys. I'm not going to let them go. The operator says no. Horn then says, I can't take any chances of getting killed over this. Okay, I'm going to go shoot. Again, the operator tells him, do not go outside with the gun. Officers will be coming. Horn says that he understands that, but he has a right to protect himself, and that the laws have changed in the country since September 1st of 2007. You know it and I know it. I have a right to protect myself. A shotgun's legal. It's not a legal weapon. Operator says, you're going to get yourself shot if you go outside with a gun. Horn then responds saying, you want to make a bet? I'm going to kill him. Well, here we go, buddy. You hear the shotgun clicking, and I'm going. He then goes outside, and he kills the two people. So that's the big controversy on Joe Horn that happens literally 2 weeks before the shooting of Rodney Shamlin. So, John, if you want to talk about sort of our initial response out there and what we find or what deputies find.
Yeah, it's November 29th of 2007, about 4 p.m. Gerald Southworth, who's the homeowner, calls 911, says that he's just shot someone for stealing vehicles on his property. Dispatches on the phone with him, tells him, put the gun down. So he says, I did. We did find it laying on the front porch of a structure there. It was sitting in plain view. It was a .44 Magnum revolver. So the property itself, which was part of this investigation, was establishing it as a residence. And there were several structures on the property. None of them looked like they were habitable. There were a bunch of old, what we would consider broken down type of vehicles that he called his antique vehicles. They were by nature antique and how old they were.
They were old and rusting into the ground. And a lot of this is perception of what we would consider a residence, what we would consider an antique car versus what he's telling us.
Yeah. And the buildings had writing all over them, particularly what you would think would be the residence at this house or this property. There's look like people just walked up and took a Sharpie to the door and wrote things on it.
Yeah, there's a padlock on it too. I mean, it wasn't a door that you could enter or otherwise. I mean, it was secured. I mean,
yeah. So a bunch of old cars on the property, several structures. There was a camper, and that we found out later is where Gerald Southworth was staying on the property. He had said that he had reported several thefts from the property days prior to this. He was having a theft problem where somebody was coming and stealing these antique cars off of his property. So he was going to go camp out there, find out who was stealing them, and put an end to it. And we later find out that that's what his plan was. But
So backing up a little bit as far as the stolen cars, the reports that were made, because it plays a factor in some of the things that we talk about with the controversy of all this, of protecting his home and other things that will come up, is he made 2 reports. Mm-hmm. And so how many things were being stolen, and more importantly, where did he make these reports at?
So I think that they were with the sheriff's office, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. I mean, as far it wasn't at this location.
No, he was
it
at
wasn't
another
at the
location.
abandoned property.
Yeah. So we knew he had lived at it. He lived in what we call East County at another residence. That was his primary residence, and that's the location where he called in and said that the vehicles were stolen. That's where he was generating the reports from. His wife lived at that other property. We knew that that's where his residence was at, which is what kind of created this, was it truly a Castle Doctrine case, because this place where the antique cars were at did not have running water, it did not have electricity. It was literally what you'd call an abandoned property for all intents and purposes that most of us would consider abandoned property.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, rightfully so. If you drive by a property, and it doesn't matter if things are rusting in the ground, where logically we know somebody owns the stuff, right? Sure. I mean, we can't come on and just take things or whatnot, but we also know what looks like valuable items or what someone has discarded and is not going to do anything with or whatever.
Correct,
And the property would look like one of those properties that someone would have paid money for someone to clear this property to get this stuff off.
Right.
And that's more what we're looking at. But, I was surprised in reviewing it, there was, I think, one report reported 10 cars had been stolen, but only 5 that they actually had like VIN numbers for or whatever. And then along with cars being stolen, there was like, I think an air compressor, some other metal type objects, which
scrapping metal was really popular in those days, where people would steal copper, just anything that with any metal component, where they could go and take it to a scrap yard and just whatever value they could get for scrap. So they were taking parts off of cars, just metal parts off of some of the cars. They didn't take the entire car, but they were cutting items off of the cars just to scrap them.
I know it was a big issue because even the law had changed back then to increase the penalty for stealing metal, scrap metal. We came up with new databases attached to. We had the pawn shop database, then we had the scrap database for people, so we could identify who was taking that stuff there. I remember calls of people waking up with no AC anymore in the middle of the night because someone had literally stole the copper of the AC while they were sleeping. So I mean, this was a common thing that was happening at the same time. So the fact of someone stealing metal really wasn't that surprising. But I mean, getting back sort of to the day of, and what we had found out later. So the day of, we have deputies arrive. When EMS, he's dead.
Correct.
I mean, there's no pulse. They do CPR. They do take him to the hospital. He has one gunshot wound to the chest. I remember that Southwark made the comment that he was just trying to nick him or something. Wing him, right?
Yeah.
He was going to wing him. Okay. Now, he shot him with a .44 Magnum. Okay. So this is, I guess, we're going to use to wing him. Obviously, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So his defense to this, and we're going to talk about some of the logic behind it if there is any. His defense is he's saying that he believed that the person had a taser.
Right. So
talk about I guess his taser or whatever.
Yeah, the taser was actually a battery-powered Sawzall. To add a little bit more to so Southworth's saying that he's sitting in this camper when he hears a motor vehicle pull into the front of the residence, and that gets his attention. The vehicle backs out, leaves, and then moments later, he hears a vehicle coming into the backside of his property. So, and we'll lead up. I guess we can talk about how things led up, but we later find in that vehicle, which is Mr. Shamlin's truck, receipt for Walmart, and
for that type of Sawzall or whatever, right?
Because we did go pull video from that Walmart later to find that he indeed did purchase a red Sawzall. Just I think it was just hours before.
Right. So there was planning as far as buying a saw, going to this property, But the one thing that we have to consider, just at face value, initially going into the scene, is there was no indication, even after our investigation, there was no indication that Mr. Southwell knew that Mr. Shamlin was stealing anything from him previously. All he had at the day of the shooting was someone had walked onto his property during the daytime.
Correct. Yeah.
And I think one of the big things that we sort of questioned and really was heavy to the side of, are you trying to stop a theft or are you trying to commit a murder? And that is, again, with sort of layout, the police station, what would you say, a half mile down the road at best? I mean, once he called the police, I think the response time was like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. I mean, it was nothing as far as officers getting there. He had a phone with him in his little RV thing. He never called the police till after the shooting.
Right.
What would you say the distance was between the two? I mean, was there like an immediate threat between him and Shamlin?
From the time that he realized that truck had pulled onto his property, I think there was probably 100, 150 yards between him being in the camper and where that truck was at,
right,
with all of these vehicles in between. So there was ample time.
Yeah, there's plenty of time. You could have called. You could have stayed in the trailer and gave guidance as to where he is, what he's doing, as people are coming or whatnot. Right. He chose not to do that.
Right.
And it sort of leads to sort of what I believe certainly was a predetermined idea of what he was going to do that day.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's, this wasn't like he was waiting there and someone's finally here, I want them to go to jail. Okay, I'm going to call for some help or whatever. And it was. I mean, it was sort of a trashy lot. And I remember there being like some concrete, I don't know if they were actual barriers or if it was just junk piled up, but I remember concrete because when he left the trailer, he had actually weaved behind these things.
Use them for cover.
Yeah, to try to approach. I mean, so when he first comes out, he doesn't holler at him. He doesn't confront him. He actually makes his way to get as close as he can before he pops out with the gun.
Exactly, yeah.
So, and in his words, after he pops out, that the guy raises up what he believes is the taser, which would be very similar to someone just raising their hands to someone pointing a gun at them. So, that's sort of what we start with. And on the day that this happens, Southworth is, I think he was in his 60s,
Yeah.
and he ends up going to the hospital.
Right. He had underlying health issues, heart issues. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was complaining of some chest pain or something. So, and certainly these cases, I'll say they're just not cut and dry. I mean, there are a lot of different variables that come into it. So it's probably not one that we would have taken someone to jail that day on anyway. These are things we're going to go and do a bunch of research and investigations to probably present before the grand jury, which is where this ends up going.
Sure.
But on that day, he doesn't go to jail and he doesn't go for an interview because he goes to the hospital.
So after he cleared the hospital that day, and he walked out without, I guess he signed himself out because he left without
Against medical advice.
against medical
Yeah.
advice. And then he comes back and he wants to talk. Remember, he said something to the effect of, "I know I should probably have my lawyer here, but I need to tell you my side."
Right.
Something like that. I remember.
Yeah, so he goes in, and he tells the story that we pretty much have told, right? That and he's had these things stolen. He's tired of these things being stolen, so he's been staying there a couple of nights for the purpose of catching someone on the property, and that's sort of what alarmed me. Is like, I mean, are you trying to catch someone and try to stop the thefts, or are you actually hunting someone, right?
Right.
And when you look in that RV or the trailer, I guess, as you said, there's no water, there's no utilities. It really reminded me sort of like what you have at a hunting place,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, he had a couple of 2-liter bottles of soda, a 30-30 rifle, his handgun, and like an egg crate or some type of bedding or
He had
whatever.
an air mattress.
Yeah.
He had an air mattress. Yeah, and there was, I think that, there was something, there was a couple boxes of ammo. But yeah, I mean, I've seen hunting lodges that were better set up than what this was, for sure.
So that's where he said he was staying in. And again, he had his phone to call. So that became the first issue. He never really could answer why you didn't just call, right? I mean, there was never I won't say there was any answer. It wasn't even an excuse. It just really wasn't answered.
Right.
And I think the answer was because that wasn't the plan.
Yeah, I
right.
agree.
So after that, we started getting some phone calls from people that knew Southworth,
Right.
had been dealing with Southworth, and one conversation that really sort of turns this towards where we're really feeling more that this is a murder. Someone has really premeditated and did this, and that is a conversation that happened. I want to say it was at a bar between him and a guy, and I may be wrong on the location, but I remember a person coming forward and basically him saying that he was going to kill someone.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I remember that we were looking at that. I don't know that we ever tracked that down to find out exactly who was, who he made that comment to, because I looked through the report but I don't think we ever found out exactly who he had said that to. But
and it may have been overheard. There was a conversation with one individual who said that basically the comment that was made was that he was going, that next week that this stuff's been stolen, says, and next week, I'm going to kill me an N-word. Okay, and so he was very direct. At this point, he doesn't know if the person's stealing, black, white, Hispanic,
Right.
whatever. He's already made his mind up that next week he's going to kill a black person, and that's basically what he said at this bar and the group of these people, and that's what they came forward. So at this point, we have a week prior him saying, "I'm going to kill somebody." We then have him posting or hanging out on his property, set up with guns and not really any food, just some soda, waiting for an opportunity.
Right.
And so the one thing that sort of adds a little bit of a twist to this is that Southworth was not allowed to have a gun.
That's right, because he was a convicted felon.
So he had a felony, and so the way for listeners that are outside of Texas, or even ones that are in that don't understand maybe how it works, if you're a felon, you cannot possess a firearm. However, after you've finished all your stuff, if you have parole, probation, any of that, once you've finished all of the requirements of the court, Texas does allow a felon to have a firearm at their residence where they live. Okay? And so that put us down a different track on this particular case.
That's
So the big thing was, is this his primary residence? Because obviously the question is, if you could not have legally possessed a firearm at the time, then this murder wouldn't have occurred. And so the question sort of comes up, can he legally protect his property with a handgun and kill somebody if he legally should never have had one? Okay,
Right.
So that's where the conversation happens. So tell me some of the things as far as, I guess, us trying to primary residence on this thing.
Yeah, so we pulled tax records, we pulled the property, from the county assessor's office, and he does own the land for sure. He owns the property, but again, it goes back to the structures that we can see on there. And do we have any pictures of what?
We had the pictures
yeah.
and
Yeah, I mean, and if people believe that these would be a residence, would that be justified in having a firearm to protect your residence? When we knew he lived at another location, because we did interview his wife the day of the homicide, and she used a different address, and they lived together at that address.
Now, she changed her story along the way, though,
Yeah.
because originally, and I know it all came down to this particular question that we're trying to figure the solution out to, is originally, obviously, for one, both the reports for the stolen vehicles were taken off of two different, one was their business, and the second was their primary residence.
Right.
And other calls unrelated to thefts, police had gone out to their residence for, and I don't remember what type of calls they were, but police had gone out to their other residents over the course of the past year, and in those reports, it basically, they were questioned and it said, yeah, this is where I live, this is my primary residence. So we had the documentation that that's it. However, obviously, as this comes up, when we're talking about castle law doctrine, we're talking about felon in possession of a weapon and these type of things, then the wife is, no, we live here. We stay here. We've been staying here off and on, and those type of things. And again, I know that we've if you're watching this on YouTube, Facebook, or our video feed, we've shown some of the photos of these structures, and it's very obvious no one's staying in these things, no one's living in these things. But again, that brings up sort of a question to me, aside from this, and it was a question we didn't have the answer to either. We were just providing the facts. It's what we do in our cases, is because someone cannot legally possess it, does that take away their right to defend themselves? Because, I mean, if we buy the story that he felt his life was in danger and therefore shot Mr. Shamlin, then do you lose that right because you're not supposed to possess the weapon to begin with. I mean, logically, if you weren't possessing it, this would not have happened.
Right.
But does it take away the right?
And I think that goes back to the true issue we had with this was whether was he hunting him or was he scared that he was going to be, tased and the gun taken from him or whatever his thought process was at the time. And again, if he was afraid, why didn't he call the police when the truck pulled onto the property? And does he still have the right? It was what it really boiled down to in this case went to the grand jury. And again, I know where we stood on this with feeling like this should be a true build case.
Well, and also understand for people as far as what we take to the grand jury. When we take something to a grand jury, we have to present a charge. Okay? Whenever we talk about anything going to grand jury, officer-involved shootings, someone that's very obvious self-defense or otherwise, when they go to grand jury, the person is being charged, or I should say the case that's being presented, the charge that's being presented is either murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. I mean, even though, so it's up to the grand jury that is able to determine that self-defense was an option, a reason in this case, and therefore it was not a crime, and they don't charge the crime. But what we're presenting, just like in this case, we're presenting this as a murder, as a murder case. And that being said, we ran into some other, I say, problems that for Mr. Shamlin, as we got closer into this, because we did check the Walmart receipt, and he is on video. He's the only one there. He's the only one in the parking lot. He's the only one paying for it. And as you said, it's like, I don't know, a couple of hours.
Right.
And he didn't have to go far. It's at the Porter Walmart, and as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, one question that comes up is how did he find this property? And he didn't live far.
Yeah, right. That's right.
I mean, I think he lived right down the road. So basically, when he's driving to work every day, he probably would drive past this property. So it's easy access, see it every day. So the other receipt, however, is I really think up to this point, we've talked about what happened that day. And as much as that's the only thing that the grand jury or people honestly should be making a decision off of is with just the facts that we really have told you so far, because that's all that was known to Mr. Southworth whenever he shot Mr. Shamlin. What we find out later, though, I think did have an impact.
Yeah.
And so we found a Walmart receipt, but we also found a scrap receipt.
Several.
So you're the one who followed up on the scrap receipts.
Yeah, he'd been scrapping Mr. Southworth's cars. I don't remember the total number of them, but yeah, he had made multiple trips down to the scrap yards and had pulled trailers across the scale with these vehicles on them. So when we talk about the condition of these vehicles that are out there, none of them run. None of them have run for years. They're on flats, so they would have to probably be winched up onto a trailer in some fashion, and in order to haul them across town to Houston where these scrap yards are at, and then they run them across the scale, find out what the weight of them are, and then they give so much per pound for scrap. And he had done that with multiple vehicles. I'd say at least 8 to 12 cars that he had done that with, and had several receipts for doing that. And there was video at these locations with Mr. Shamlin's truck pulling these across the scale. So he was responsible for stealing several of the cars off of that property.
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, they only had so many VIN numbers.
Right.
Like, I think there were 10 cars, they had 5 VINs. So the ones that they had VINs, we were able to show that Shamlin did steal them.
Yeah.
He had taken, and as you said, it brings up another point. I mean, these cars don't move, right? I mean, they have to be winched, they have to be, so, and even though it's an abandoned lot, there's houses around it.
Right.
I mean, so no one saw him doing this and called it in, I guess, thought anything of it. just because of the condition and whatnot, I don't know, or they just didn't want to get involved. But either way, no one called in. We never heard of any tips or otherwise suspicious vehicles, anything on the property. He would get about how much per car?
$300, I think, $300 a car.
So about $300. He had done about 10 cars or so. But I think that sort of plays a factor as far as in the case, even though, again, it shouldn't, but it's the fact it's the right guy.
Yeah.
Right?
He did, yeah.
I mean, he's the one who has been entering his property, who has been stealing the cars, but reality at the time of the shooting, Mr. Southworth doesn't know this. Okay? I mean, this could have been someone new, and actually, obviously parking there. It could have been someone entering to, I don't know, steal some scrap or otherwise. There was a shed on the property, as I remember, and the shed was loaded with junk. I mean, but it was scrap metal junk, like rebarb and other stuff. And the reason it sticks in my mind is because normally we do our best on any scene to recover a round. And this one had gone through and through. It was an entry to the chest and out the back. And in the direction that Mr. Shamlin would have been standing, the bullet would have headed towards that shed. And again, normally we go through everything to recover the bullet and whatnot. And you just look at this shed and just think of it. Think of the show Hoarders. And think of it being packed with only metal things. And the main way that we usually find a bullet is with a metal detector.
Right.
Okay, so this was not going to happen in this case. And whether we totally unloaded it out of there and tried to find this. And then you look at the value of what that piece of evidence is going to bring. Right? And in this case, normally we're getting it so we can tie it to a gun. Well, we know what gun fired it. He's admitted to firing it. We have the suspect. So the forensic value of it was not as big of a thing. I do remember another part involving the gun, though, because the gun was tested. And the gun came back to a cold case murder from 1979. And not that was related to Southworth, but they wanted to know.
I do vaguely remember that. Yeah.
They wanted to know, did he own it back in 79? They were very interested in talking to him about it, but I don't know that link was ever made. But the gun did come back to a previous murder from 1979, and the cold case was looking into that as far as trying to trace who possibly would have had that gun. But as I recall, I don't believe it was actually linked to Southworth. He just somehow ended up with the gun, and which may sound strange to, again, some other states, but in the state of Texas, when we get the question all the time of, is the gun registered to someone? And the reality in Texas is if you buy a gun from a federal firearms license place, a store or otherwise, then it gets documented who bought the gun. But after you've left the store, you have it a year or two, whatever, and you decide that your neighbor wants a gun and you sell it to him, there's no documentation. 3 years later, he sells it to someone, there's no documentation. The original person who bought it is the one who's going to show on alcohol, tobacco, firearm, federal paperwork when you start tracing it. So there's not, in Texas, we don't have that stringent, a name applied to it. So that made it a little bit more difficult on the 79 case of any type of history of this gun. I don't recall any type of serial numbers, things being scratched off or otherwise, but so that was the other issue that came up. So we go back to he should have never had it in the first place. Okay, and then we're dealing with, again, the media on the Castle Law Doctrine. And I think everyone is in agreement on the fact of protecting your property.
Yeah.
Right? So you have people that know the reason behind it, meaning the reason behind the law, and we totally agree with that, and people having their right to bear arms and protect their property and everything else. These two cases, the Joe Horn and this particular case, brought to light some other issues. And that is, you don't have to retreat, but I guess the question is, do you have to advance? right?
Yeah.
I mean, both were secure. Joe Horn and Mr. Southworth. They're secure in a location that there's not any type of immediate threat. I don't know the particulars of what was happening in the Joe Horn case. I do know, I think it was a burglary or something. So maybe they were about to leave. I don't know that particulars. I know in this one, nothing had even been stolen yet.
No.
He hadn't even started cutting on anything. Obviously, by the history we find, that was his goal. He was going to do this. And I also sort of found that odd is the other times he's stealing a whole car. So I'm not, obviously we never had an opportunity to ask, is why just the saw this time?
Yeah, he didn't have a trailer hooked up to his truck that particular day. And like I said, those cars were in different conditions of demise, I mean, as far as that goes. So again, it did appear that some of them had items removed off of them. I don't know that we know who did that at any time, but we're only assuming that that's what his intention was there that day, was just to cut some items off from having the little sawzall. But again, the cars had, over a period of time, had been having items taken off of them. So that was why we weren't sure how these were antique cars. It looked like this was something that they were either he was selling parts off to other people, or nothing was ever going to happen to them.
Right. I mean, the original description, it was just one that I found funny, was that they were antique collectible Cadillacs. And I mean, if someone were to describe that, I mean, if I didn't see this scene, if I just think collectible Cadillacs, I'm thinking of like some pristine garage,
Right.
where you got like these just nice cars everywhere, not the covered in leaves. I'm not sure he needed the actual saw to get some of the parts off of these cars. You probably just grab it and rip it off. So that was unique for that case, but it brought us back to the grand jury. And so by law, we cannot talk about anything that happened in grand jury. Those are secret proceedings. We can only talk about the results. And those results are that they did no bill Mr. Southworth.
Right.
Which when they no bill, they say they're not going to pursue charges. They believe that no crime was committed to be charged, or at least they believe there was not enough probable cause to move forward with a charge to go to court. So we don't know specifically in their minds or otherwise, because again, it's a secret deliberation for many purposes, that we don't get to hear the feedback on why you thought this or why you didn't think this. So we can only speculate. And my personal speculation is that I think the fact that he was the one stealing the stuff, that he was the one who actually had stole the 10 previous cars, that he actually shot, I don't really want to say it as much, but the right guy, right? I think that played a big factor.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and I know, the charges was presented as a murder case that particular day, but I think we did follow up to see about pursuing felon in possession of a firearm on him after that was no billed. We felt like there was still the question of whether he still
Should have had a
should have
firearm.
had the firearm to begin with, and obviously they didn't think that there was any grounds for us on that. But I just think that was one of those that just never really set well, just because of the totality of it. I mean, when we did the walkthrough video with him, and I'm filming it, and you're walking him through, and he shows how he approaches Shamlin on the property, and how he basically hunts and stalks him like a predator would a prey. I mean, how he walks up through the vegetation.
He's crouching down.
Yeah,
He's not standing approaching. He's crouching near the ground and seeking cover. And
yeah. And then, like you said earlier, he just kind of jumps out on him with that gun pulled. And then his response was he had a taser, and I was afraid that he was going to tase me, which, due to my heart issues, telling what would have happened, something to that effect. But again, he didn't need to do that to begin with. He never like going back to calling the police, that they weren't even en route at that point where that was an option. It was he pursued him to kill him.
And we did ask, have you ever seen a taser? And he never had.
Mm-mm.
You know what one looks like? No.
Yeah.
And we also asked, have you ever seen a saw? Well, yeah.
Right.
Have you seen a saw like this one? Well, yeah. So you know what a saw looks like. You don't know what a taser looks like, but we're going to say it's a taser.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I think that was the thing that really didn't sit well with me either. For one, also the history. I mean, when you've already made a decision, and I can imagine being extremely frustrated. I don't care if it's abandoned property or POS cars. It's still your stuff, right?
Sure.
I mean, and when things are getting stolen off your property, you get irritated. And I mean, we've all had people tell us, man, if I was home, I would have done this. If I was home, I would have done that, right? Ever, and then we come up with all new torture ways that people talk about, right?
Right.
But to actually plan, because I'm not talking about your home and this happens, that to me is a different story.
Mm-hmm.
But when in my mind, it's sort of the same as like if I told you today someone is coming to burglarize your house, okay, and you don't call the police, go, hey, someone's coming at this time to burglarize my house, or sit somewhere so when they come, it just, you're going to take matters in your own hands. So that's what I saw this as.
Yeah.
This is definitely just you made the decision of what would happen this day.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we never did get the question answered as to, he was going to kill him an N-word. The fact that he was speculating that it was a black person, or he had information he knew that he never disclosed to us that a black guy was taking this off his property. This isn't a predominantly black area, for one thing. So
No, it's predominantly white.
It's predominantly white, and for even the few black people that you encounter in this part of the county, for him to have lived right around the corner, obviously, that piece came together for us where we knew how he knew about the property. But again, Southworth had some information we never were able to get to the bottom of with how he knew a black guy was taking these, whether a neighbor had told him or somebody, you know what I mean?
He never admitted to that.
Yeah.
And so was it just him, I guess, speculating that, it must be a black person stealing from me? Or was it that he had information that actually narrowed it down that he knew it was?
Exactly, because when we talked about scrappers earlier, we both know from our experience working property crimes, there are more white, lower income males scrapping metal than black males.
All the cases I talked about, the copper while you're sleeping,
Yeah.
where those were all, like you said, the lower income, quick buck, let's just be direct, pretty much meth heads,
Right.
looking for their next fix. It's predominantly white, right?
Yeah.
And in that area, majority of our crime was predominantly white,
Correct.
right? So why you jump to this conclusion, but I mean, on that note, so after we had worked our case, after this was done, and I'll give you some words here, not from Shamlin's family, but actually this is from Gerald Southworth's son. So his son wrote me after the fact, and it basically says his name, and he's the son of Mr. Southworth, and he wanted to enter some facts to the case. So I'm going to read directly from his letter. So first off, Gary Southworth is not by any means a good person. He is very racist and a cruel person. I feel he killed Mr. Shamlin in cold blood. I feel he set out to kill him. For what I have heard from the news and my mother, as well as what I know of my father's character, Mr. Southworth is a cold-blooded killer. So that's coming from his son. Now, I will disclose this letter came from TDC, the Texas Department of Corrections, where his son is, but it's still his son writing about his father and a description of what he believes the personality or otherwise of his father is. Again, we sort of all have opinions of what could have been done different that day. I would hope that at some point Mr. Southworth has a different opinion of what could have been done different that day. But I believe wholeheartedly that murder was the right charge.
Yeah.
I think there were other options. I think that due to everyone's solid belief of protecting your life and protecting your property, and so strongly about that, I think in this particular case was an advantage for Mr. Southworth and took advantage of a belief that most people have and used it a different way.
Yep, I would agree. And you know, since then we've worked cases where we've worked the Castle Doctrine involving motor vehicles where people have been in their motor vehicles and things like that. I think this was such new legislation at the time that these were very new cases in that people were interpreting it exactly. So I think since then, you've seen the ones where it's your property or your neighbor property that you're watching out for. I mean, I think that you're hearing more and more of that falling under the Castle Doctrine that, and again, I mean, so yeah, this was very new legislation at the time with what this was.
And I think you're right. I think as this first came out, people were trying to very much make it, I guess, more substantial. When what I've found, no matter how we change, massage the law or whatever, I've always found that self-defense comes down to a very basic concept, and that is if you feel your life is in danger, if you feel a third party's life is in danger, you have the right to use up to deadly force to protect you or a third party.
Right.
And that seems to be like the underlying foundation of any of this. It doesn't have to do with retreating, advancing. Otherwise, if you can articulate those things, then you're solid on protecting your life or someone else's. Where it really gets to be a gray area is when you start just involving property. Mm-hmm. Because people will always say, was the life more valuable than the property?
Right.
And again, I know many people, including myself, that if someone were to come to my house, my first thought when someone's coming into my house is not they're going to take my TV. Right. It's they're going to harm me or my family.
Yeah.
If I were to have to shoot someone, it would be because I felt they were going to harm me or my family. I'm not saying I'm standing back and letting them just start hauling stuff away, but that's your first thought.
Sure.
So I think that's where a lot of this gets into gray area confusion or otherwise with people when it just comes down to truly self-protection or protection of another person.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that going back to that analogy, I mean, when people are walking into they're going to have to harm you in order for them to be able to remove that property. And I think that's the perception that most of us would have is you're not going to just stand there and let them walk out. I would have to do something to disable you, disarm you, whatever, for me to be able to successfully leave with your property. So I think, so yeah, but anyway.
But that was, so this case, as I was looking up, we're sort of, just as any time, obviously this is from '07, and we certainly remember just about every murder that we work, but not in the greatest of details, so we go and review things. So in research this case, I actually found some very sad information along the way, and that was that 7 years after Mr. Shamlin was killed, his son, who was 24 years old, around 9 p.m. In, I want to say, the Humble, Texas area, was killed, shot in the chest, and not related to theft, not related to stealing, anything like that. But he was in the street and shot. Apparently, a college basketball player and was noted as a Houston area rapper or otherwise, but was gunned down on Humble Street on a Saturday night about 9 p.m. So his son died the same way that he did 7 years after the fact. So just more impact to that family and otherwise. So
interesting.
But it brought up a lot of conversations, that case did, as far as self-defense, castle law, felons in possession with a gun and what rights they have. Hopefully this case, as we've talked about it, brings up some of those conversations. I think that there's some that don't really have answers. I think it has to deal with your jurisdiction. It has to deal with what your community believes a responsible person can do or should do. And that's why we have our grand juries. And we certainly support whatever decision they came up with, whatever they decided on that day and the reason they decided. That's what it is. I think we were still very solid in presenting a murder charge on the case. I think we presented all the facts and articulated that well. So as we wrap up, I would like to thank our sponsor, Planet Forward, Lone Star Community Radio, for making this show possible. If you have a topic for the show, or you'd like to be a guest, or you'd like to sponsor the show, please contact me at dan@crimesceneaday.com. If you'd like to start your own radio show or podcast, Lone Star Community Radio would like to help you out. Contact Dick at irlonestar.com. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.